Okay. With everybody in here, in theory, trying to go on to the animation program, I would assume that over break, you don't want to lose your skills, and I would definitely be continuing to play with Maya, because 2 or 3 weeks off. How long's your break between the next semester? A month. Yeah, a month. See, yeah, I mean, I would definitely have an educational version at home and be kicking things around. You'd be shocked at how much you could forget in a month, especially with New Year's in there and drinking coma, a food coma, then a blackout drunk. You could black out. You lose a lot of information. So anyway, while we're in here, we're playing with fairly decent machines, specs wise, and different people are having different experiences with their, they have different hardware, but if it's a laptop, or if you have a desktop, or if you have an old laptop, whatever it might be, if you're trying to run Maya, you can run into some problems, so this machine that at least I'm sitting in front of is a dual Xeon, 32 gig, like a lot of RAM, decent, it's decent, and you see sort of some of the problems that I have here. So anyways, what I'm going to do is when we introduced Maya, we just sort of, when we introduced Arnold, I just sort of handed you the keys and we just started rendering with it, right? And that's kind of like saying, oh, we're learning how to drive. Oh, here's a Ferrari, like, go. Good luck, like, try not to kill yourself, So there's a lot of stuff that's in Arnold that I either completely ignored or glossed over because it's just more technical than you sort of want to get. But today we want to actually sort of get that technical, so that what the idea being is that when you go to practice on whatever machine that you're on, you need to be able to scale Maya so that it is reasonably reasonably snappy for you, because if you have your iteration loop, you want that iteration loop to be as short as humanly possible, because when you're trying to make decisions on like whether you want to change something, if you're waiting for a render over and over and over and over and over again, if it's 5 seconds, then if you're waiting for 10 renders before you can make a decision, then you've only wasted a minute or something like that. When you're doing 3-minute renders because your machine is chugging, that's 15 minutes. So it's like getting your iteration time down is shortening that feedback loop as much as humanly possible. Just both makes your job easier and makes everything better, because it's like if you have 2 hours to work on something, if you've made 50 changes, tweaks and changes, and made things better, because like I said, your iteration loop is so short, then you have just basically more, like if your renders are taking 10 minutes and you got 2 hours to work on something, you can do the math on how long it's, how many times you're going to get to make changes, right? So like I said, the idea is get that feedback loop down as short as possible, so that when you're laying out lights, when you're changing materials, when you're posing cameras, all that stuff, you're seeing things as quick as possible based on the hardware that you have in front of you. So as you go on, in 10 years probably none of this will matter if you stay in this industry, because the way computers are going, the feedback loop will be so short that you'll probably see things in real time. But this has been an issue since I got started, and the more computing power that computers have, the more complex they write the software to choke that computer, right? So it's like, if you take a computer that's twice as fast in front of me, they're gonna add in stuff that's gonna make increase realism, but it's going to take that computing power. So we're nowhere near a point where these machines are fast enough to sort of show you everything in real time as you go and all that stuff. So anyways, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about all the things that you can do, both to increase quality of your renders, but also how to set things up as you go to like I said, get that feedback loop nice and high. Okay, so I got a scene here with 2 cars in it. Okay, I got a Model T or A or whichever one this is, in this DeLorean, okay? And like I said, say I was gonna, start setting up my renders, okay? Now, we've all had this situation where, like, why is it taking 15 minutes? Why is it taking half an hour? Why does it still look shitty? All that stuff. So, what you're trying to do with your render settings is set them up so that even if they are going to take a while, you want to know that time is invested. If you're going to take a half an hour to render a frame, you want to know that, like I said, that in the end it's going to look good. So I'm going to talk about how to get to that point. Okay. So, like I said at the start, there is that Arnold has a lot of things on by default that increase realism and do really great things for making really nice images, but are really compute intensive. And once again, that's why your laptop is burning your lap off, or it's taking a half an hour to do anything, or that kind of stuff, right? So if we come into our settings here, okay. And keep in mind, all renders have these kind of switches that that allow you to turn things up and down and change, basically throttle the quality to get something in front of you quicker, right? Okay, so in Arnold, I opened up my render settings here with this guy right there. Okay, remember the first tab was just the common parameters, which allow you to select a resolution and what camera you want to render through, and if you're doing a sequence, blah 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 blah. When you go to the second tab here, you'll see the Arnold renderer. Okay, and no, I don't think these are defaults. So what you have here is essentially these are your throttles for the renderer. Okay. And they all sort of handle different aspects of sort of making the image, okay? And the cool thing is that they coincide with, or not coincide, what's the word? They sort of match up with things that you already know from dealing with surfaces, right? So if I select my black plastic here in the front and I go over here and there it is, okay. Notice here that camera we'll talk about in a second. Diffuse. So we've talked about how diffuse is the base, usually your base color. Okay, diffuse roughness and all that stuff, right? But these are somewhat synonymous. Specular is your shininess. Like whether it's an actual shininess or diffuse shininess or barely there, whatever you want to call it, right? Transmission is basically transparency. Okay, so this throttles that. Subsurface scattering is subsurface right here, so you can mess with that. And volume indirect, we're not going to really talk about. Volumes are things like you can Arnold will render things like clouds and explosions and smoke and all this cool stuff that we're really not going to touch in here, but that's what volumes are. Okay, so I'm going to leave that at 0. So anyways, is how it works is essentially when you change these values, like I said, you're essentially throttling Maya or Arnold, and you're saying, I only want you to only want Arnold to go up to a certain level of quality to get something back to you quicker, right? Okay, so if I open up, if I go to the Arnold tab and I open up the interactive renderer, okay, and I zoom in here a little bit, I hit render. Okay, so we've all seen this, where it just starts basically chewing on it, okay, and refining it, and let's see. Yeah, so you can see it's sort of, like starting to clean up inside here. That's because all these settings are up reasonably high, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn them down, and I'll show you what you get out of that and what that can show you, okay? So I'm going to basically I'm going to turn them all way down, okay? So, okay, so when I do this, what this is saying to Arnold is actually by doing -3, you see how I get this blocky render. What it's saying is actually render only every fourth pixel, right? That's why I'm getting these like super blocky, image, right? But if you see if I move this, it'll still render it. It's almost in real time when I do that. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so this looks like hell, you know, but it's really quick. So, you know, if you're on a really old machine, you know, maybe this is all you can sort of afford, you know, speed-wise initially, right? But if I come up to maybe like -1, see, so this is really still very, it's crappy, but you can tell what's going on here, right? So at this level, if you wanted to come in here, and if I, like I said, if I was on a slower machine and I wanted to start moving my lights now, if I move my light, okay, you see how I'm seeing the reflection, you know, almost in real time on the windshield, okay? Let me get that cleaned up. There we go. Okay, so, you know, at this level, I've got everything off, but you can see, like I said, my interactivity is really, really, really high. So it's like, if I'm just trying to sort of either set up a very basic lighting scenario, okay, oops, okay, like I said, you can see how quick those updates are, right? Okay. And, you know, this is at least sort of a part of your original image or final image, right? It's like, you know, it's just like it's almost like a Polaroid where you're waiting for, well, that's a bad reference. So it's like you're waiting, it's like the basics, you know, the very basic start of the render, but you can, you know, like I said, you see kind of where it's going, okay, but it's still very interactive. So it's like, instead of, you know, if I pump this number way up, okay, pump a couple of these numbers up, you'll see it takes a while to sort of get it together, even on this machine, okay. And it's not, I guess it's not too bad with this one, but like I said, we're really talking more about laptops and things like that, okay. Okay, so like I said, they call this look dev, okay, which is basically where you're setting up your lights and you're trying to make decisions on, you know, where things should be and what it should actually look like, right? So I'm gonna maybe make this red, and I'm gonna shrink it down, maybe move it in. So I'm getting this feedback really, like I said, I think you see what I'm talking about. I'm getting tons of feedback very quickly at these lower levels, okay? Okay, but you'll see, I mean, so some of the things that you're not seeing is your windows went black, okay? Because I turned my transmission down to 0, and basically transmission is saying how often should the renderer trace, meaning shoot beams through things that are transmissive. I'm saying 0, right? So as soon as I bump that up, now I can see through my windows, okay? Usually you want to go up a couple of iterations, because if you have glass on top of glass, you want to be able to see through those multiple iterations, okay? Because remember, you know, Arnold is just essentially, you know, throwing light through the scenes, you know, out of your object, or sorry, out of your lights, just like a real light does in reality, you know. So it's like, you know, it's bouncing light off of objects and through other objects just like reality, okay? Which is why the images, when you let them go, look so good, you know, because it's basically trying to simulate what actually happens in real life, okay? So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my transmission, which allows me to see my transparency, okay? I'm going to now, so like I said, so diffuse is the diffuse amount, okay? So, you know, by default, if you say, if I have anything going on in here, you're going to see something out of your surfaces. It's just how many times do you sort of want things to be able to be bounced or calculated, okay? So if I come up to 1 and I come up to 0, so basically what this is saying is sample every pixel in the scene, bounce the light just once off of the objects and then back to the camera. Specular, same thing. That's the high. You remember that's the reflective highlights one time, and bounce light through transparent objects once. Okay, so for this computer, okay, this is a pretty great, you know, setting for sort of setting things up, right? So you see how interactive things are if I let it go, and hopefully you guys are sitting in front of a similar computer. I don't know if these are mostly the same. Tia, do you know?
The computers in this room are one of the strongest.
Okay, good news. So you should be able to use the same kind of thing. So essentially, you know, you're getting a rough image, but once again, you're getting it back really, really quickly. And, you know, this would also be, you know, on its way. I wonder what this blue line is. Do you see? Yeah. You know, it's just gonna basically what you're gonna get is whatever this looks like, but better if you continue to increase your samples, which we'll do in a minute here. Okay. So some of the other tricks that you can do if you're when you sort of get into a level of detail. So you know, at this level, this is great for posing lights, for posing cameras, because, you know, like I said, you can see right here, you know, if you like this camera pose and the way that the light's working on the car, you know, keep, you know, and I only have one monitor, which is a drag, so I got to find a place for this. But like, so if I keep messing with this, I'm gonna move this over here and bring it down. So okay, so these are, you know, we've played with this before, but you see how I can just sort of drag this, and I could make it really, really bright. I can make it, you know, I can dial it in really, really quickly, because like I said, every little change I'm making, I'm getting back really, really quick. I'm not, you know, making a change, waiting even 30 seconds. It's changing instantly because my sampling numbers are so low, but they're at a level that is quick on this computer, but also at the same time, you know, fairly representative of what it would look like in the end. Okay, so maybe I'll bump this up just a tad, not much. Okay. Okay, cool. So, so what you can do, so what you can do here is in your render settings. So like I said, I've kind of looked and found kind of a decent, like what I'll call a rough settings, or sort of a layout settings for this computer and Arnold, right? So what you can do is you can say presets, right? So I can could take these settings here, and I could say, you know, Arnold rough layout version 01, just in case I want to tweak it, and boom. So, you know, by having these presets right here, okay. Oh, there they go. No, don't delete it. User, there it is. I can easily bounce back and forth between what, you know, a production setup and a rough setup, you know, a layout setup. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go in and sort of try and find what would be a final render value for this scene. Okay, so now when mine goes, or sorry, geez, when Arnold goes and renders everything, you know, we've talked about how it bounces light around, okay, and that's kind of some of the secrets to its, you know, why things turn out so well, because without that, you know, there's just something missing in your images, you know. So Arnold does this all over the place, but like I said, the problem with it is that it's compute intensive, okay. So what you want to do is you know, if you had unlimited computing power, you could just take all these, you know, zip them way up and walk away, and, you know, it may take 20 hours a frame or something like that. So, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to find that middle ground between nice settings and a really nice image, okay? And generally people just call this cleaning it up, okay? So there's a lot of different parameters that put noise in your image. You know, obviously at this sampling level, you know, there's noise all over the place, right? And trying to separate where that noise is coming from is the sort of the goal, and sort of the you know, the work of getting good render settings together. Okay, so once again, when you look at this, it just it's noisy all over the place, and you know from where, like I said, where it's coming from is what you need to try and find out. Now, the cool thing is out on the Arnold website gives you a really nice little workflow diagram, which is, like I said, it's really cool because essentially it's just like a flow chart where you just answer the questions and it helps you figure these things out, right? Which is really great, like I said, because noise can come from all kinds of places, and you don't want to sort of just globally say, I'm going to turn everything up to 11 and just hope that I get a good image out the end tomorrow, right? So if you follow their chart, which is I put out on the network, and they actually have a nice little website, you'll you'll be able to track this stuff down and get really clean, really nice looking images out of it. Okay. So, so like I said, what they're basically telling you here in this flowchart is to basically inspect a bunch of different components of your image and the things that are happening in the background of your image to try and stamp this out, okay? And the way you set that up is 2 tabs down over here. So we're in the Arnold render tab in the render settings, okay? Come over to AOVs. So AOVs stand for arbitrary output variables. I know it sounds like a mouthful, but essentially all it is it's saying all this information that it's computing to give you these images, spit it out so that I can see it, okay? It's basically just saying separate everything so that I can get a look at it, because, you know, up till now we're just making these images and it is what it is and we save them out to PNGs and whatever, right? But like I said, there's a whole lot more behind there that you can see, and you can actually work with it in other programs, but for now we're just going to sort of talk about why you would want to get at this information, okay? So if you follow their guides, which, like I said, are really good, essentially they're telling you, you know, what things to look at. And you'll notice, you know, they say diffuse indirect, specular direct, diffuse direct, specular indirect, and transmission. Okay, well, and then subsurface scattering if you're using it, right? So what you're going to do is you come over to AOVs, and it's real simple. Essentially, you click. So it says here AOV browser, and down here are the ones that I've installed or sort of turned on, okay? All you have to do, if you click built-in, you'll get a big list of all the things that are available to you, okay? So these are all the channels that you can spit out and get a look at, right? And there's a ton of them. I mean, they do a bunch of different things. So anyways, all you do to get to add one to the list is to click on it and click this arrow, and then it'll add it to the list. So see, so here it says active AOVs, and so this is them. This is the ones I have active here. They're also, like, once again down here, and then here's all the other ones that, you know, I have available to me. Okay, so there's obviously tons and tons and tons of them, and you know, you can ignore most of them. But if you look here, this is a good setup that, you know, that will sort of give you all the things that they want you to inspect. And I'll go through them in a second here. Okay, so I'm gonna, what do I get out of my LP? 1 second. Yeah, I'll skip that one. So, okay, so yeah, so these are all the ones, like I said, that they're telling you to grab, okay? And I'll show you what that means right now. So essentially, as soon as you add it, it's gonna add it into your render buffer over here, okay, your Arnold render view. And if you come up here, which you'll see beauty, diffuse, you know, diffuse, direct, indirect, all the things that you see over here are now available to look at as a separate channel, okay, in your render, okay? So beauty is all of these things sort of added together to make the image, okay? And then these are the individual pieces, right? So diffuse direct is if I come back and I grab any of my materials, okay, so this is diffuse direct means what is the color and the channel, you know, the information coming out of diffuse surfaces and the light that hits them without bounces, okay, meaning just light that comes down, hits an object. You know, it's not caring about the reflection that's on it. It doesn't care if anything's bouncing against it, any of that stuff. It's literally just you know, so that's why if you look over here, you know, like this object is red, but there's, you know, if I go back to my beauty, see, there's reflection and there's some stuff on the, you know, coming off the ground and all, you know, all kinds of stuff, right? But if I back up and you know, if I click this object, right? So this is diffuse, you know, like your base, you know. I wish they would use the same, you know, naming convention, but like base means diffuse, right? So this is red. So when light hits it, it is red. This is, you know, slightly, the car body is slightly gray. The ground is white, right? So, but what you can get out of this is if you look, you know, you see how crappy the shadows are, right? So, you know, the shading on the you know, the objects looks okay. You know, it's maybe a little noisy, okay? but it's not too bad. But like I said, what you can get out of this is how crappy the shadows look, okay? So to change that, just like any other, just like the sampling in the, here, this is what we're talking about, sampling, okay? All the lights have their own sampling settings, right? And essentially, the bigger the light, the more samples that you want to give it, okay? So if I come over here and I'm going to look, let's see. So I'm going to turn this other light off so we can just concentrate on the one. Okay, so here's this light that's giving me all this stuff, okay? So if I come in here, you see samples is down here, so we have light, shape, and spread, and all this stuff. But one, this is a pretty good sized light. So if it was a tiny light, I could actually probably, potentially get away with one sample, but it's not, right? So as soon as I kick that up to 2, see things start to get better looking. Maybe 3. And then 4. You don't want to go too high in this because it is compute intensive. And when I turn up some other things, it's going to look, turn up the diffuse, it's going to look better. So you see, as I dial this in, it goes from 1 really bad to 4 pretty close at this level. Okay, so that's what this channel is pretty much best for. Okay, it starts to expose how your shadows are doing. Okay, so maybe if I turn up 1 here and turn up the diffuse 1 more, we might want even 1 more. Now I'll go to 2 or 6, or sorry, go to 6. And this can go as pretty much as high as 16 or 32 if you really have a really big light and you really got to stamp out some noise in your shadows. But so you see this, it's not too bad. Okay, so that's something that you can also you can turn it up at render time when final render time and get something better. Okay, so then we go on to our diffuse indirect. Okay, now diffuse indirect is the light that's bouncing off of objects onto other objects in the diffuse channel only, not in the reflection channel, right? So if I turn that on, okay, you'll see like all that other stuff turns off because that was the light, or this was the contribution to the image that was coming directly off of lights and hitting objects. So instead, now we're seeing what comes off of the objects, okay, and hits other objects, okay? And that's why you see like a little bit on the ground here. Let me zoom in there. Because light is hitting this door and hitting the ground, and vice versa. It's hitting the ground and illuminating this stuff, okay? Illuminating under the tires, okay? And once again, you can see that it's really noisy as hell, right? Especially on the ground here. We're getting some red from something. Oh, this other car over here. So like you're seeing actually the light bouncing off of the red of the car and onto the ground, okay? So that's done with that's done here in your diffuse channel, okay? So I'm going to pump that up a little bit, and you'll start to see that start to clean up, okay? Maybe 4. Now keep in mind, every time I go up one of these levels, I'm sort of exponentially upping my render time here, okay? So what I'm going to do here to just try and get to a good cleanup point is I'm going to do a region render, okay? Which you can get here or just holding shift on your keyboard. What that's going to do is only render what's inside the little box so that you can sort of do quick tweaks, and instead of doing the whole image, you can just sort of see what it would look like if you bumped up to say 2. See, now it's almost completely clean when allowed to do its thing, okay? And these don't have to be perfectly clean, because it is getting added to other the other channels, so it's sort of it's just a contribution to the image. So at this level, it's not too bad. So I'm going to turn that off and let it just sort of do its thing. So we have overall 3 camera samples, which is sort of the overall sample rate. Now diffuse samples. Now once again, so diffuse will handle the light that's coming out of lights and hitting objects, and that includes bouncing off of objects and also just hitting them normally, okay? So by looking at the diffuse indirect channel, meaning light that's indirectly hitting objects from other objects, we sort of isolate that and allows us to clean that up, okay? So let me rotate around a little bit. So you see it's starting to get together, okay? So if I come back up here to, hold on, it's choking on me. Come on. There we go. Whoa, whoa. Okay, so I'm going to come back here to my beauty pass, and you'll see, you know, it's not too bad. I mean, this is fairly clean because, like I said, you know, like you're sort of turning off the other lights to sort of see this stuff, but you see when you add it to this direct light, you know, it's really a small contribution, right? If I go back to my beauty pass, so it doesn't need to be perfectly clean in this instance. Now, you know, every scene is going to be different, right? If you have light just coming in from one place, you know, like meaning like you know, like some of that like architectural rendering or whatever, you know, they just try and do everything very realistically, like, you know, light just coming in from a window or something like that. You know, you may not get away with just 4 bounces on the 4 samples on the diffuse indirect. Okay, you might have to bump that up. Okay, so let me just sample some other little areas here. So, but you do want to inspect, like I'm going to inspect in these tire right here. So I'm going to inspect in the tire wells here, because that's light that bounces up underneath. Okay. Diffuse indirect, once again, that's light bouncing off the ground, and it's not too bad. I mean, you know, it's awful dark, so it's, you know, it's okay. It kind of falls in there. Okay. Okay. So if we keep looking, so I'm on the beauty channel here. So I'm looking at the, you know, in theory, the final image. So now you'll see noise here, right? So this whole this stainless steel body of the DeLorean, you know, is going to be made mostly through specular, meaning reflection, right? So that's why we added these 2 guys, right? So specular direct is the first bounce that you're going to get off an object, okay? Meaning, like, this is sort of what it sees. You know, what a clear what a reflective object sees, you know, outside of itself. Okay. Okay. Keep in mind that that's right here, right? So, or the settings are right here. Specular, you know, specular sampling rate. Okay. So if we look at this, the first pass is pretty nice. This is clean. You know, this is you know, it's actually cleaning itself up as it goes. Okay, but if I go down to specular indirect, you'll see how noisy this is, okay? And this is because, you know, this is a very diffuse, it's a shiny object, but remember, I'm sure I turned the roughness way up because this is like a, you know, this is stainless steel, right? So if this object was very, very shiny, you know, I might get away with not needing to do this, but you see my roughness here is 0.5, right? Because this is stainless steel. So obviously I'm gonna have to bump that number up. So I'm going to turn my diffuse down a little bit just so I'm not computing that as I go, but I'm going to turn my specular up, okay? So I'm going to go up to 3, and you'll see if I let it go, multiple passes, see it start to clean up. So instead of being so gritty, all this stuff is cleaning itself up, okay? And I'll tell you what, I'll just do another region. Okay, because obviously all this I'm not worried about. It looks pretty good. Okay, so this is the second pass of the shininess, right? So the first pass was nice and clean. The second pass we're trying to work with here. Okay, and that's this, you know, the extra bounce and the extra reflections that are coming off of the object. Okay, so by going to 3, you know, I'm getting something pretty decent. Like this is, oops. You know, it is a little noisy, but it may fall in when you know, blended with the, I'll go back out to the beauty pass. So when blended with the other passes, it's not too shabby, okay? And it all depends, you know, like if you're doing a still, you know, then great. You know, like lots of times you turn this stuff up and just deal with it, right? So if I pump this up to 4, it's probably going to get a whole lot cleaner, okay? Going to take longer, but it's going to get a whole lot cleaner. If this is a still, great. But if you're rendering an animation where you're rendering 500 of these frames, you want to get this down to, whatever you can get away with, essentially, right? So if 3 looks pretty good, then you want to stay with 3 as long as once again, you can get away with it. And especially if, like I said, if you're on your laptop at home, or if your computer isn't, like this one with a lot of power, right? So, like I said, trying to find that place where it looks, pretty darn good is the main point, okay? So, like I said, so we've looked at specular direct, the first bounce of the shiny, specular indirect, which is any of the diffuse or the roughed up surfaces, okay? Rubber is like that, 0.6, see the roughness on the rubber is really high. Okay, so if I come in here, keep in mind, you can draw a new area by holding shift all you want, and then you can just hit this guy to let it go and see the whole image, okay? But it's really handy to obviously just limit your computing power to one little window, okay? Okay, and then finally we have transmission, which is really only applicable if you have, applicable, that's a big word. If you have roughed up like glass or whatever, you actually don't need to worry about it so much if you have non-rough, like these windows. I don't have any. If I go in here and look at the material of the windows, I have no roughness, right? Which means there's nothing extra to compute. So if I look at the transmission channel, meaning the transparency, it should be clean. Everything else I'm looking at here is issues with the objects that are beyond it or whatever, right? So you actually don't need to worry about this too much. It's only when you get into like frosted glass and things like that. So like frosted glass could be noisy, and you would bump that up in the same way that tell you what, let's test that out. I'll show you what I mean. So if we come back out here, I've got I'm gonna stop my renderer and grab this. So this is a glass, just a test sphere. When I'm sort of putting materials together, I like to, sometimes seeing materials on objects can be sort of deceiving. So I like to put them just on a, something like especially if you're making things like chrome and things like that. Like I said, they can be deceiving. Or if you put it on just a ball in the scene, you can get a really good sort of non-biased look on what the material is actually doing. So anyway, so one of them's glass, as you can see here. So I'm going to bump the roughness up, and I'm going to do this, let it go. Okay, so I'm going to bump it way up and kind of do like I said, kind of a frosted glass situation. Okay, and if I go back to the transmission channel, see the noisiness in there, okay? So that's what's controlled by the transmission sampling, slider here, right? So if I go back down to 0, I get nothing out of it actually, so it's not doing anything. I go to 1, very noisy. Bump up 2, it's getting better, and go to 3, and potentially that's close enough. I'll just do that part. Let it do its thing, go back to beauty and see what it looks like. Yeah, see, that's not really going to do it. So that's the final image. So all of this is done through transmission. So if this channel doesn't look right, let me zoom in there. Or yeah, if this channel doesn't look right, see, it's just basically going out because there's no other surface. There's no diffuse surface. There's no, there's not much, there is reflection, but it's, maybe I get, no, I'm doing that. I have my specular at 3. So anyway, so I need to bump this up because, like I said, this, what you're seeing in the transmission channel is getting bumped all the way out to beauty. So I got to bump this up or it's going to look crappy. So I go to here, wait for it to finish. I may do one more. No, maybe 5 on that. And I am zoomed way in, so it's kind of unfair. But like if I back out to 1:1, that's where it's at. So my transmission's reasonably clean, and that, like I said, that bumps out to there. So you see what's going on here. So maybe if I take one more pass at it. So I bumped up my camera, which basically multiplies all these guys out, and we'll do a 4th pass. It looks really, that looks pretty nice, okay? So I'm going to turn that off and let it render the whole thing. so what's interesting here is that, you know, it's like, it's hard to see because they're not showing you where the little buckets are, but you see how it's cleaning up here, piece by piece by piece. And while you're waiting, you know, you can go through your channels, check stuff out, make sure things are reasonably clean. Or you can make a sandwich or watch, you know what I mean? Like there's, yeah, rendering sucks. It's a bummer, but it, you know, it's getting better, which is nice, but you know, it's still just, it takes time. So this is my final-ish image. Problem is though, is when now, actually when I'm posed here, you actually see what's going on back here. See how noisy this is. So this is kind of a problem that you hit when light is bouncing around and it starts to get sort of weak. So what you're seeing back here, notice how, so if I'm going to go into my indirect diffuse channel, see the noise that's back against the wall here? Oops. So that's because, you know, light is bouncing off the ground and going all the way back to this far back wall, okay? And sadly to say, the only thing you can really do there is bump up and try and get rid of that noise in the diffuse indirect, because it's not shininess that's causing me problem. It's diffuse light that's bouncing off the ground and the objects and getting back there and sort of falling into the shadows, but showing up as shittiness essentially. And that's the bummer about, you know, something like this. So, you know, sometimes ways around this is just to kind of, you know, color correct it after the fact to kind of push this down to black, you know, because otherwise you can get your render times way up there. So I'll do one more. I'll give it 4 and 4. Let me go back to the diffuse indirect. So it's getting really clean. So that's going to make all this stuff, it should make it really, really clean. So as I wait here, try and zoom in. Yeah, see, so this is pretty darn nice right here. As long, you know, if this back wall is going to be nice, then the stuff actually in the front's going to be a whole lot nicer. Okay. So let me stop the renderer. Okay. Let me pause it, or pose it so it's a little bit better. And let it go and see what it does. Oh wait, my other light is off. I'm going to turn my other light back on, which is right here. Oops. I think I just moved the whole ground plane. Hold on. Ooh, yeah, I did. Jeez. Shit. The pain of one monitor sucks. This is like 1997 style right here. Okay. So I've got my other light back on, which should actually improve things because, you know, the less stuff that's sort of falling into weird shadows, the better. I'm going to make sure my samples, see my samples are at 1. So I'm going to look at the size. This is actually, that light is even bigger than the other, so I'm going to turn this one up to 16. 16. And hit render. So, okay, so I've got 4 camera samples, 4 diffuse samples to sort of deal with the darker, you know, the way that we have sort of a lot of shadows going on here. 3 specular channel samples, which are basically handling, you know, anything that's shiny, the car, you know, any of your chromes, all that stuff, and any of the bounces that are coming off of there. So if I let this guy go, hit 1 to 1. So, you know, this is, you know, reasonably quick, you know, like once again, frames can take a whole lot of time to compute, you know, and you can, like I said, you can see why you go through trying to get some render settings to see what the final image is going to look like, but also at the same time be able to sort of quickly do a final image. And, you know, like I said, you can walk away knowing you're going to get something, not something you're going to need to tweak, you know, come back and tweak. So it's still chugging on. I can't see where it's working, which is kind of a bummer. If you look close, usually you can catch where the little buckets are. So you can see, oh, there it goes. So see where it's starting to clean up out here. So you just wait, essentially, which we're not going to do because it's boring. So I'm going to stop this. But you see, if you let this go, we're going to get something, especially if I hit 1 to 1. Okay, that's the resolution you should be looking at this at. You know, I'm not seeing a lot of noise in the shadow. In fact, these are really, really nice. These are gorgeous. This is fine. It's okay. Like I said, you may want to color correct that sort of out. The metal looks pretty good. The shines are nice. It's a decent image, you know. So what I would do here for this scene in particular, once again, like you want to be able to tweak these things depending on the scene. Like I said, if this was an architectural rendering of some room, some of these values would not necessarily be good. These are some like the transmission, you know, like if you didn't have a bunch of the frosty glass like this, you could turn this transmission down and save a bunch of time. Okay. I'm keeping this, the subsurface scattering to 0 because I don't have any subsurface scattering. Remember, that's that stuff like the gummy bears and things like that, you know, the light going through an object, you know, that's really expensive to compute. So it's like, if you don't need it, if you turn it off, it doesn't even think about it. It just doesn't, once again, it doesn't think about it. Same with volume indirect. If you're not using a volume, which we aren't here, you can just turn it off and just, it's not even going to mess with it, right? So that's great. So okay, so like I said, for this scene, we've got decent settings here, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to save another preset, and I'm going to call it Arnold, we'll call it production, and I'll just call it car scene, because once again, you know, these things, sadly to say, aren't, you know, they're not universal. You can't just, you know, you could save one and say, oh, this is my base production render, or, you know, yeah, and then make tweaks from there, because these settings are pretty good. 4, you know, 3, 5, you know, like I said, this may be a little high. If you wanted, you could develop yourself, you know, some settings that are named, you know, no frostiness or something like that, and, you know, be all set or whatever. So anyway, so what I've done here, so, you know, since I have these two settings now, I can sort of set up, you know, keep tweaking on this scene and sort of, like I said, making it better, but knowing I can get good images out of it at the end by just going and getting my preset and I can go back to rough layout. See, it bumped everything way down, and I'm getting my, you know, gritty layout here again. But if I had a second monitor, I just put this over here, and I could do things like work on my camera placement, you know, work on my lights, and you see I'm getting something that's representative of the final image without the sort of pain of the final image or waiting around for the final image, right? So I can, you know, like I said, I can just mess with lights. I can, you know, 21 gives me this. I'll go back down to 19, maybe shrink it. Anyways, you see what I'm saying? The feedback loop is really fast because I'm making changes and I'm seeing them right here. And I know that if I let this cook with my other settings, I'm going to get a good image. So I can like make changes, load the other settings, let it, like I said, walk away, let it cook. You're going to come back and your image is going to look great, right? So, what did I do? So I'm just going to tweak it a little more. Maybe come in like that. And you see, it's the thing is by controlling your camera samples, which is the top one, meaning that's the overall amount of times it's going to sort of flush through the image. It stops, right? So it's not getting in your way. Like right now, you know, if I had multiple samples, it's going to keep refining and my interactivity is going to go down, right? By doing it this way, I can make a tweak, let it sit. It does one refinement, done. I get control back. Oh, there it goes. Another one. Why did it do 2? Okay. So anyway, so yeah, so you could, like I said, I can come in here, I can make changes to, you know, on my object, I can make changes to my surfaces. Okay, so let's see, maybe bring my roughness down. Not tell you what, bring it up, but I'm going to add a clear coat, like so, with low roughness and a lower index of refraction. So basically, I'm just adding a clear coat on top, and you see now I've got a nice shine right here. I'm going to actually shrink, the lights are a little too diffuse for this, so I'm going to shrink it down, bring it down, like so. Okay. Too low. A little higher. Rotate. Smells like somebody's cooking like soup or something. Okay. So there we go. So like I said, I've made this refinement, so it's like, okay, you can see what's going on here. It may be noisy, but you can see where the light is posed and all that stuff. And you could always tweak this up a little more to kind of get a, if you think you're getting close, you just bump up your camera samples to 1. That way it'll run through another, set of refinement, and you're like, okay, that's good, right? Stop it, go back, load your production preset, which bumps all these guys up, let it go again, and just let it cook. And like I said, if you're on a slow machine, this may take 15 minutes, but you know what you're going to get. Okay, that's the main point of this, is what you're going to get when you're done and you save your image out. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop that. Okay, so a couple other things I want to run through real quick too is that a handy thing in here too is also, now keep in mind, the bigger the image you try and render, the more, of course, it's gonna the longer it's gonna take, right? So obviously, trying to find a sweet spot between being able to see what's going on in the scene and also keep it low is, you're also trying to play that game too, right? So one thing that you can do is I'm set, if I go back to the common rendering settings tab, I'm set to render HD 720, okay, which means 720p, which means 1200 pixels by 720 high, okay? But if you come over here to your your Arnold render window, you have test resolutions, right? And you can choose what size that you want to render at without having to make changes over here, right? So if I say render at 100%, it's going to, and I hit render, it's going to render a 1280 by 720 image, right? Full size, right? And obviously it's going to take longer, but it's going to look good. Okay. So, blah, 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 blah. Just keep that cooking. But like I said, what you can do is you can render at half resolution. Okay. Hit render. But you see, it keeps it zoomed up. Oh, weird. It zooms up on it, but it's only rendering a quarter of the size.
I can find C doesn't assume up in your music.
Shut the hell up. Does anybody use Siri at all? Like, anybody use it at all? I don't. I just don't. Anyway, so if you have it at 50%, you get, once again, it's fuzzier. So the image may be fuzzier, but it's, once again, it's actually, when you have the resolution, you're only rendering a quarter of the pixels, right? So if I come up here and I go back to my presets. Oh, let me stop it first. Stop. Okay. And I load my user rough. So now I'm only rendering 640 by 320 pixels, and at this lower rough render settings. Like, once again, I'm getting really great feedback, and you can see where it's going. Like, this is, once again, this is very representative of what a final image would look like. And you just basically dial it in for the machine that you have and the power that you have available. But like I said, I'm able to make tons of changes very, very quickly. In fact, this is too big. I'm going to go back down to 1:1. Shrink this up. Okay, and I'm gonna mess with my lights here, right? So repose my lights, start lighting up the front, bring this other one around the other side, maybe. Okay, there it goes. Start lighting up this other side. Okay, and just basically do a quick pose. So that's kind of the workflow. Is like I said, work at half resolution, which is quarter the size, find some rough render settings that give you decent feedback on your machine. You know, like this is decent for the machine, this machine that I'm sitting in front of. It's all going to depend on what you have at home, or you know, wherever you're working. But you know, once you tweak these up, you can sort of, once again, you can make these changes really quickly. Okay. So like I said, these are the channels that you're going to want to get, and they're actually listed here in this this flow chart, right? You can actually see them right here: diffuse indirect, specular direct, diffuse direct, specular indirect. Okay, so you just add those all in there. And it may actually come, you know, I think you might only have to do it once. They may actually come along with the presets, meaning like when you save a preset, it possibly grabs all these channels, or all the settings in the tabs. I'll have to double check on that. I think it does. So in theory, you'd only add these channels in there once. Okay, so you know, I'll go through doing it again. Okay, so I'll pull all these out of here. Okay, so all you do is say built-in, and we want diffuse direct, enter, or you know, this little arrow, diffuse indirect, specular direct, specular indirect. And like I said, there's a million other ones. Like if I was using subsurface scattering, same thing, direct and indirect. This would help me figure those things out. Transmission, that's the you know, going through the object, and that's it. So those are all the channels that I need to sort of debug and find out how to set up a good image here. Okay. Okay. There we go. So I'm gonna zoom that out. Now maybe bump this guy up just a little bit. And maybe bring the bring this guy up just a tad for the sort of light the front. Okay. So like I said, so you know, now I've got this sort of snowy but you know, image that I you know, recognize. I go load preset, user, production, hit render, and just let it do its thing. So even on this machine, it's probably going to take about 5 or so minutes. Okay. Okay, cool. So another thing that you can do, I don't use it much, but it's available to you in these kind of things, is a thing called Snapshots, and it allows you to make comparisons between your settings, or actually whatever image that you're making. You can sort of, you don't lose them. You know how now I'm rendering, if I rendered again and render over the top of it. So actually I'll just let this chug for a second. So it's cleaning it up, as you see right here. Like now all these little doodads are going away. So you got to be, you know, you just got to be patient when rendering. It's just something that takes a long time, and like I said, it always has. But the beauty is with Arnold, at least you get really nice, you know, pictures out the back end of it. Okay, so I'm going to stop this. Just imagine if I continue to go on or whatever. So all I have to do is say store snapshot, and what it does is it puts it down at the bottom here. So there's snapshot number 1. So if I go and I, you know, repose or whatever, and say I shoot this guy and hit render. So see, it gets rid of it here, but I still have my snapshot down there. Okay. So like I said, imagine I let that go. You can store another snapshot. So essentially you can see your progress. Like, so if you're making changes and you kind of want to make it, you know, maybe make a change, but you want to compare it to your old one, you know, just in case it sucks, you know, you could say, well, you know, I'm going to go back to what I did here or whatever, you know, and you can comment like, I did this, you know. So each of those can have their own, you know, this too, you know, whatever it might be. Like you can, it's a way to leave little breadcrumbs for yourself. So if you're like, you know, this was the settings over here, and then you did it again, or you made a change but you didn't like it, you can get that right there. Okay. You know, you can see some of these other things, but yeah, so you can go through your snapshots. Snapshots, you can save them if I remember correctly. Save as, yeah. Oh no, sorry, you can run through them. Set as, sorry. So what's kind of cool too is you actually have, if you go set A, see down here, if I right clicked, is that, yeah. So I clicked right, and then I get set as A and then set as B. So if you're doing something you wanted to compare the two things, you can do this little slide thing right here, which is pretty cool. So, you know, if you're like, do you like A? Do you like B? Do you like A? Do you like B? Whatever, you know. It's kind of cool. So, and we talked a lot about the isolate thing, so I'm not going to talk about it again, but obviously that's a huge lifesaver. You know, when you go into that mode, whatever you click on is the only thing that's going to get updated in your render. So if I click on that, you know, I just click on the, I clicked on the, excuse me, the hood of the car. How do I get out of this? Display snapshot. Escape. Clear. Clear B. There we go. Okay, so you got to clear those. Whatever you select is the only thing that's going to be rendered, which is you know, really pretty cool, because you can actually isolate materials. You can isolate objects on their own, and you know, make all the changes you need to without dealing with the rest of the object. Like I did notice that the black on this bumper really eats it. So let's see here. 0.5, mostly black. It's too diffuse. It's too shiny altogether. So, you know, I can tweak this right on the object, and maybe a little more diffuse. So this is supposed to be, you know, kind of a, well, I'm assuming kind of a half shiny black surface. Okay. And when I let that go, it'll render the whole thing. Okay. So like I said, we've talked about a lot about that. You can switch cameras if you have multiple cameras in your scene that you want to render through. You know, all that stuff. One-to-one will just zoom up your, you know, if you go in and you zoom in your image in and out, you can just hit one-to-one, which will show you the actual resolution that you just rendered at. I'm not sure why this doesn't look so good. Okay. All right. So yeah. So like I said, those, you know, those are a lot of the sort of the tricks, you know, to setting up renders when you're not sitting in front of, well, I mean, no, even when you're sitting in front of a good machine, the quicker you can see stuff, the better. So it's like, you know, you want to find those settings. I think that, you know, I don't think there's anything that would stop you from like finding some decent rough settings that you could apply on your machine, whatever it may be, you know, that are pretty global or should work for most, you know, settings as you lay stuff out and get that interactivity back. And then, you know, like I said, you may, you know, then you could get some production settings that you would then just tweak to sort of, you know, help deal with the you know, the individual stuff that happens with different scenes. You know, this scene, you know, our big challenges in this scene were the glass that I made that's diffuse, and the fact that, you know, this is like a little studio room here, so like light is sort of getting to these back corners, right? So if I render this, I probably will actually see that really crappy bouncing light again. So move this away. So like I said, you know, every scene has its own, you know, I hate to use the word challenges, but the challenges of how to you know, light it and how to sort of get its render settings to be optimum and not waste a bunch of time, wasting your time, wasting computer time, all that stuff. Okay, so like I said, if I let this one go and I look at the Diffuse Indirect, which is going to be the light that bounces way out there, it's not too bad. In fact, I'll just do a window and zoom up on it and let it do its thing. So I'm at, you know, these are my production settings that I got going on here. Yeah, so when it's done, you know, it's a little grainy, but it's not the end of the world. When I look at the beauty pass, which is all the passes, you know, added together, it looks pretty decent. Whereas, you know, all through here looks just great. Okay. And like, you know, and sadly to say, you know, every renderer has sort of a different way to approach this because it's a problem with all renderers. So this is how you deal with it in Arnold. If you go to, you know, V-Ray or Corona or RenderMan or any of these things, they all sort of do it a little differently, but they're all sort of trying to tackle the same problem, you know, like just trying to get noise out of the images so things look crisp and awesome, you know. And it's just like I said, the big issue is that we don't have you know, we don't have unlimited computing power, so you have to, you know, take what you have and you know, use it as wisely as possible, you know. So let's see. I think these scales are off. Like this is not quite right. So like I said, if I let this cook, and it probably take about 5 minutes, it's gonna be, you know, it's gonna be pretty decent. Okay. Which I'm not gonna do. Okay. All right. Let me make sure I hit everything. So, like I said, we're not going to get too much into these other issues because, you know, these are the ones that really affect your images at this stage. You know, the other thing to just, I guess, be aware of is if you want motion blur out of an object, you have to enable it, and you also have to handle that's done through camera anti-aliasing, or the camera samples, right? So if you have a very blurry object and it looks grainy and crappy, you need to bump that up, and that's definitely gonna motion blur is fairly expensive render wise. So if you turn up, I think Motion Vector will give you that. You know, you can have it. It's just it's going to take some time to compute. Okay, so that's how you turn that on. If you're, you know, if you got something that's supposed to be zipping by or whatever. I'm not going to mess with any of that stuff. Nope. So like I said, you don't need to worry too much about these things. You know, some of these other things. The sampling up here is really where it's at. The little dials to sort of dial this stuff in. It's important. And once again, you know, like I know lots of people were already hitting this where they're like, this was killing my laptop. And, you know, there are going to be certain computers that like this is just not going to run well on, you know, and it just, you know, either you got to think about upgrading or getting off of a laptop, you know, and onto a desktop machine if you can, because you can get a lot more computing power on a desktop for cheaper than you can on a laptop. So, you know, that might be something to think about or whatever, but, you know, there isn't anybody who couldn't use really optimized render settings, you know. So that's those. We don't need to talk much about this one either. So these are all just the little, you know, the other little knobs that you can deal with to work on renderers. You don't need that. Don't need that. So remember the AOVs, arbitrary output variables. That's all this stuff. These are the ones that'll help you figure out your renders. They're all available right here. Okay, and when you're done with them, you can turn them off if you really want to or whatever. You know, they're not something you need to keep forever on, or, you know, in your final thing, in your final image. And we don't need that either. So that's the basic gist of it. Is you know, make yourself some preset. You know, take a sample scene, take your personal computer, run through some changes, and try and get it so that, you know, you're at a point where it feels like, oops. Rough layout, where, you know, like I said, where you're getting decent feed, you know, where it feels like you're getting kind of decent feedback. Because if you're not rendering an image every time that to get to this point right here, then you're saving yourself time. You're like I said, you're making those changes because now I can say, oh, okay, like I need more light over here, and, you know, like I said, it's all about iteration. It's all about like how quickly can you get back what's happening in your scene. It's without, like I said, without a doubt, the name of the game. Like the quicker this happens, the more you can refine your scene and get it looking good. So see, like right here, just in the course of, you know, 30 seconds, I made like, you know, 4 or 5 changes, right? If I was waiting for images, you know, a decent render every time, you know, that could have taken, you know, a ton of time, and in the past has. You know, that's the nice thing about this interactive render, is that I'm seeing stuff, you know, even if it's grainy, I'm seeing stuff real quick. So Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, I think that was all I really wanted to cover. I just wanted to go through this, and like I said, I would highly recommend whatever personal machine that you're working with, going through this exercise and trying to get yourself some presets that feel pretty decent. These settings right here might not, work for you. You may need to go down to -1, and you may need to go down to transmission just 1, and whatever it is, you just, like I said, you want to be able to go like that, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, see an image, make a change, see what you got. And then you want to go through the exercise of finding what your production settings are for your scene. Your rough settings can be fairly universal. Your production settings are going to be scene specific. They're gonna depend on what's going on in the scene, whether you have a skylight, whether you got, this is inside, so we only have 2 lights to deal with, but you see where the sampling is for, on the lights themselves and for the overall scene, so let me turn this down. That is too shiny. There we go. Yeah, so like I said, that's about it. That's really what I wanted to cover. I hope it makes some sense, and I would, like I said, what I would do is go back into one of the exercises, maybe the one we did with the lighting, with the room and the robot or whatever, and see if you can get more interactivity out of those scenes. I think you'll see, like, when you get those settings and you go back to that assignment, like, you'll see how much easier it would be to redo it, because you can, like, play with the lights really quick and get your scene set up so much quicker than back when we sort of didn't play with any of this stuff and left the defaults, because the defaults that when you load up Arnold are practically production. They're practically like ready to, you render it and you get a fairly decent image out of it, but you can obviously, like we just saw here, you can throttle it back and not have to constantly be rendering trying to render final images. So like I said, if you're looking for something to do, that's exactly what I would do. I would grab one of those guys. Also, the only other thing to be aware of that can speed up your renderers, and it's something that you just have to keep in mind, is that when I bumped up the settings for the samples of my shadows on each light, those stay where they're at, and they're meaning, like, I'm not throttling them by using these or my render settings, right? So to get things going quick again, I could go back here, remember what these were, put them back down to 2. So my shadows are going to get shitty again, but my interactivity is back. See, in fact, that helped quite a bit. The shadows, computing the shadows really smoothly was fairly expensive. See, so the problem with that, the bummer about that is you just got to remember when you're done, oh yeah, I gotta, like, if I'm gonna render a final image, I gotta go over here and I gotta bump these guys up, load my preset, and let it go, and I'm gonna get something good. So most of your settings to go between the rough and the production are gonna be in your presets, or come along with your preset, but not the light setup. That's the only other thing that's going to affect rendering times that is outside of the the Arnold rollout here. Okay.
So would you recommend, like, while you're still kind of working things out and setting up your scene and stuff like that, having set your lights to samples like way down?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I would put them, once again, it's about, like, the machine that you're on. If the machine you're on doesn't seem bummed out by 2 samples or 4 samples, then stay at, 2 or 4 samples or whatever. If you're trying to get that interactivity back and, you've pushed all this stuff down, I would push these back down to 1, 2 at the most for big lights. Like, the bigger the light, the more samples you're going to need, because it's trying to make a more diffuse shadow. So it's like a little tiny light, right? With a very harsh shadow, like doesn't need a ton of samples because it's just sort of going mostly in one direction. A big diffuse light, like these things that I have here that are like the size of a car, they need a bunch of samples to look good. So the bigger the light, the more samples you need to get a good soft shadow out of it, like we're getting here. And the more render time, obviously, that costs in the end, Let me zoom up on this. So this one's been cooking away. Something's wrong with the window. But yeah, so anyways, like I said, that's basically the gist of it, and it's really something that really, really worth learning because it's just, like I said, I mean, I can't stress enough how important it is to iterate as quickly as possible, to make changes and just essentially refine until you're like, I can't change anymore. I can't make this any better than I can see, So the shorter the feedback loop, the more you can do with the time that you have in front of you. Like I said, if you got 2 hours, then you want to make those 2 hours count. So the more changes you can make, the more that you can see and try new stuff out and go back and tweak this and add this and just stare at the image and go, what more can I do to this thing? That's what you're trying to do. That's the name of the game. So it's like, that's why you try and get these as tight as humanly possible, or as interactive as humanly possible. So that's it. And like I said, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. We don't have there's no assignment here, but like I said, if I were you, I would while this is fresh, I would definitely take your home machine. And if you don't have a home machine, you really should invest in a home machine. And like I said, try and get these these find out what these values are for your machine, and you'll get a lot more out of it because you'll be able to make changes so much quicker. So that is all, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.